That's good.
Hopefully we get a couple more legislators. I see Rep. Eaton hanging out.
Our co-chair, our remaining co-chair, Representative Carlo, is getting on board. There he is.
Good evening. Am I being introduced?
Not yet.
Not yet. Oh,
We're giving another minute.
You are
Okay.
being recorded.
All right, I'll keep my mouth shut.
Senator Grahowski, I'm sorry, I was muted and the video was off because the boys are running around the house and I couldn't find how to turn it back on, so.
That's okay. It's sort of an odd time. It's a great meeting to just bring along with you in whatever you're doing in the 6 o'clock hour.
Yeah, I'm making supper, so I'm here, but I'm making supper.
I'll admit to Facebook and this recording that I have gone grocery shopping during broadband caucus meetings in the past, and I've learned a lot that way.
That's great.
Well, Senator Vitelli had mentioned she was very interested in joining, but it would depend on if her internet connection was good enough at her house. Which is why we're all here meeting.
How so many of our meetings start at Maine Broadband Coalition start with exactly this.
Yep. Well, I think we'll just get started because the beginning part is introductions in particular. And then hopefully folks will continue to join. I'm gonna kick it off here. So I am Nicole Grahowski. I am the senator for District 7, which is much of Hancock County, including many bridged and unbridged islands, which I think have exacerbated internet issues in some cases. And I live in Ellsworth, and I am pleased to be co-chairing this caucus with a couple colleagues who I'll let introduce themselves next as the Senate Democratic member of the caucus. So I'll send it over to Senator Rick Bennett.
Thanks, Nicole. This is I'm Rick Bennett. As indicated, I am a Senator Republican from Western Maine. Specifically, I live in the town of Oxford, and I represent the Oxford Hills, as well as Bridgeton, Harrison, and Cumberland County, as well as the Greater Freiburg region in Oxford County, as well as Mechanic Falls and Minot and Androscoggin County. And I have to say, I'm really pleased to reconvene the Broadband Caucus. I was a co-chair, one of the 4 co-chairs, the only returning one this session. The others are no longer in the legislature, and I'm delighted to see the caucus continue. We did great work over the last 2 years, and look forward to continuing that and working with the folks at the MCA and the Maine Broadband Coalition, in particular, who are leading this drive and taking us to the next level. And great to be here with all of you. So thank you. I'll kick it over to Representative Dodge.
Thank you so much, Senator Bennett. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jan Dodge. I represent House District 39. I live in Belfast, and I also represent Northport and Belmont here in Mid-Coast, Maine. I am here in the Broadband Caucus because I have so many constituents who are worried about last mile connectivity. And I've just discovered a few donut holes in my district. So I'm really hoping that we can continue the work that we began a few years ago. Welcome. And I will kick it over to Representative Carlo, please.
Great. Thank you so much, Representative Dodge. I am Nate Carlo. I have the great privilege of representing House District 137, which is part of Buxton and part of Hollis, Maine. I serve on the Appropriations and Financial Affairs Committee along with Senator Bennett, and delighted to be here to help move forward the broadband priorities. I represent an underserved community. So this is an issue that I care deeply about. Thank you.
Thank you. So you've now met all of the co-chairs of the caucus, and we thought we would start the meeting by allowing other legislators who are here and interested in introducing themselves and, let us know your district and maybe some reasons that you are interested in this caucus and the work that we are doing. So it looks like we will call on Holly because you are right there, front and center for me.
Yeah, thank you. So I am Representative Holly Eaton. I'm District 15, which is, I live in Deer Isle, and so it's Deer Isle, Stonington, Brooklyn, Southwest Harbor, Tremont, Frenchboro, Idaho, Swans Island, and Vinyl Haven. I think that covers all of it. So I think Senator Grahowski mentioned that her district covers a lot of bridged and unbridged islands, and I think that those are those islands. So broadband is a huge issue here. So when I saw that there was a caucus, I thought I'd better, join the meeting and see what kind of work is being done and how I might be able to support our constituents in their urge and desire to get better broadband. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Eaton. Representative Arford, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much, Senator. Yeah, I'm Representative Poppy Arford. I hail from the western part of Brunswick, State House District 101. I'm excited to be here, and one of the reasons I'm specifically here tonight is, like Jan, I have some constituents who are experiencing, I think it's the donut hole. They're in an area in the town where their internet is just dropped, and it's almost like this, it's like a donut hole because they're the hole of the donut, and then the big donut around them gets reasonably excellent coverage, and we're trying to figure out what's happening. So I may learn something tonight.
Thank you. And if we have an in-person meeting, we'll be sure to bring donut holes to take care of this problem.
I will bring the donuts.
And I will put the holes back in them. Senator Tipping, if you're interested and able to unmute, we are just doing some quick introductions where you represent as well as your interest in the caucus. But I also know you may be listening along, so we'll give you 1 second and see if you are available to say hi.
I appreciate it. We're getting ready for cross-country ski lessons here, so I'm sorry I'm not on video, but yeah, I represent Senate District 8 in central and northern Penobscot County, and a lot of relevant interests here from, we're doing fiber build out around Orono and Old Town and some issues with last mile there, up to the northern part of my district where don't even usually have cell service. So a lot of issues that I'm glad you guys are thinking about too.
Great. Thank you so much. Happy ski lessons. I'm jealous. So I think that's everybody from the legislature who's currently with us. And if others come later, we can have introductions after the presentations. But the next thing that we were planning to do in the meeting was to have some presentations from the Maine Broadband Coalition as well as the Maine Connectivity Authority. So I'm going to turn it over to both your groups and let you guys introduce yourselves and proceed as you have planned. And we are very enthusiastically waiting for the updates on all the good work that's been happening since we last convened. So thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Senator Grahowski. So I'm Miles Smith. I'm the Executive Director of Maine Broadband Coalition. I'm the first official employee. This was a kind of network of organizations for a number of years, and I was hired about 6 months ago. And then a couple months after that, brought on my colleague, Joe Oliva. The two of us are going to be staffing this committee. So if you have logistics questions or informational questions about how we're running this or suggestions, please let us know. I think maybe makes sense for you folks from MCA to introduce yourselves too, and then we'll come back to our presentation and I'll mention Nancy as well. Maybe Brian?
Sure. Hi, I'm Brian Allenby. I'm the Communications Director for MCA. And will do my best to stand in for Andrew. I can't promise nearly as many, witty quips and funny sayings. Andrew's in DC today at a conference, so looking forward to getting to know you all and hopefully doing our best to answer your questions. Tanya?
Thanks, Brian. Hi, folks. I'm Tanya Emery, and I'm the Economic Development Director for the Maine Connectivity Authority. And I'm also joined here this evening by our colleague, Kendra Joe.
Hey everyone, I'm Kendra Jo Grindle, and I am the Community Capacity Manager for Maine Connectivity Authority.
Cool. And I will also mention Nancy Smith. She's got her hands tied at the moment, but she's listening in. Nancy is from Grossmart, Maine. She's also a regional partner in supporting MCA's broadband rollout for Kennebec County. And she is also the chair of the policy committee of the Maine Broadband Coalition. So she works with us on tracking and shepherding through bills. Hey, Nancy, thanks for joining. And I see Representative Ziegler just joined. Maybe if you want to say hello, Representative Ziegler, before I dive in to my vote.
I do. I had a little difficulty finding the link, and so now I am here. Hello.
If you want, Representative Ziegler, we just said a quick introduction of where we represent as well as our interest in the caucus, but no worries if you want to wait till the discussion at the end.
I
Or
can.
we can tour your house.
Now I have a more comfortable seat, but I'm going to. Yes, I'm Representative Paige Ziegler. I represent District 40 in Waldo County, the 7 towns of Appleton, Alsboro, Liberty, Lincolnville, Mount Morrow, and Searsmont, and I co-chair the Energy, Utilities, and Technology Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I will give a quick update from Maine Broadband perspective on what's going on in the sector. Hold on, why did it go to that spot? 1 second. Got to reload my, there we go. All right, you're seeing the shared screen, I hope.
I see that it looks like it's loading.
Resume. Yeah, it's going very slowly. Hold on 1 second.
That's great.
Huh. It doesn't want to share it on full screen. Okay. Sorry. It always works in tests and then it never works when you need it to. How about now?
That looks good.
All right. So just quickly, I'll give a sort of update of what's going on in the sector and maybe provide a little context for what Maine Broadband Coalition's role is in the sector, which I think will help provide context for the new members and also for those who view this later. So Maine Broadband Coalition is a nonprofit organization. We are guided by a group of organizations that form our advisory committee that include economic development, local government, Maine-focused ISPs, some anchor user institutions in the telehealth and education sectors, and also technical experts and advisors in the sector. And we also have a group of about 3,000 members, most of whom are very local level community volunteers who are trying to advance broadband deployment and improve digital equity for their communities. And we are governed by a board, an independent board that comprises individuals from both groups of organizations. What do? We provide education and capacity building, basically to help people make decisions about what they want to do with their broadband deployment, help them understand the context of a broadband operating environment that they're in, and get organized and mobilized to improve their situation, either for digital equity or for broadband quality of service in their locations. We also provide sort of general information and facilitation for the sector. We have a newsletter, social media. We host initiatives such as the Broadband Summit every year. We take in and tell a lot of stories about what happens when broadband gets deployed and all the great benefits that people enjoy from it, and also what doesn't happen when we don't have the connectivity we need to operate in 21st century digital economy and digital society. We also staff this caucus as one of our roles. We do have an advocacy role that is based on our guiding values. I'm not going to go through them in detail. They're on our website, but these guiding values were laid out by our advisory committee and inform all of our work, including positions we take on any issue or some of the things that we've advanced legislatively in the past. So some challenges that we're seeing here in the state. Why is this a problem in particular in Maine? Equitable deployment of broadband across the country has been a problem in many places, but it's particularly difficult in Maine. Several reasons for that. First, our demographics and somewhat small population, somewhat aging population, and our geography, where we're fairly rural, very forested, we have hills. We are located at the end of the country and thus at the sort of edge of a regulatory environment and not on a through information highway to many other destinations for data and information. So all this stuff creates market failures for internet deployment, for high quality speed, and for competitive pricing. And the result of that is that few Mainers have a viable choice among multiple comparable high quality internet providers. Local monopolies in internet service, particularly of the higher speed variety, are very common. Most Mainers only have one choice if they do have a choice. The results of that is creates other kinds of market problems and access problems. And even fewer Mainers than those that have a choice have access to the world-class internet technology that is the course of technology development and the future that we're seeing. So only about 10 to 15% of Mainers have access to fiber optic internet. The smaller end of that would be up to 1 gigabit symmetrical speed, which is basically where the industry is going, where demand for internet is going, where we'll all be talking about as the standard in a few short years to come. So that need is also statewide. I mean, I think there's a lot of folks out there who believe that this is only a problem in our most rural areas, but as you can see from a study put out by Maine Development Foundation just last year, it's only this small 10 to 15%, depending on how you count it, percentage that has even 100 over 100 symmetrical speed in the state. But those people include 32% of users in Knox County, 23% in Penobscot County, but then a smaller percentage in York and Saginaw County. So this isn't a inland versus rural divide problem. Right now we're seeing this isn't an urban-rural divide problem or a north-south problem. It's a problem that we're seeing everywhere. That will change over time as the market catches up and we see more private investment. But right now, we are seeing this problem all over the state. Now, what would be the dividends if we were all to have great broadband service in our homes and businesses. It would pay huge benefits to our business environment, allow our businesses to reach customers, create content, process sales, expand reach, creates dividends for education. It allows folks to study from home, reduces the barriers to entry to education, and allows students to study from home. Telehealth, it allows people to see a doctor or a specialist where they can't get to them physically. This is especially important for our aging population that wants to be able to age in their place in their homes in Maine. Provides opportunities, access to jobs, access to new employment markets, and increases the value in properties because you don't need to be proximate to a workplace. A lot of folks are able to work from anywhere now in the post-pandemic world, and just increasing the quality of life, allowing you to connect to friends, participate in public life, participate in civic life. And these benefits all compound a network in order to build on each other. So yes, it is true, each of these things is on their own important, but all of them together lead to building a more sustainable, more prosperous and equitable society in the long term. So in Maine's broadband ecosystem, you'll hear a lot about the Maine Connectivity Authority. They are the lead state agency in deploying all of the funding we have available to improve these situations. Maine Broadband Coalition is supporting them in that effort and working more on the community and grassroots side to make sure that we have a pipeline of people and places that are ready to improve their internet situation. And I won't get into all the details here, but this is how we work together. Where are we now as a sector? From our perspective, we're seeing demand for internet bandwidth is growing rapidly. It is outpacing the growth in the capacity of many internet technologies that we use in the state currently. And that is going to create challenges in the future if we don't catch up to where the internet is going, right? Every year, the websites that you try to load, the smart devices that you want to bring into your home, just the basic demand for having live video streamed conferences or doctor's appointments, every year that stuff gets more and more taxing on our internet infrastructure. And if we don't improve our internet infrastructure, it's like roads that you don't improve over time. If you just have dirt roads and you put more and more cars on it, eventually they get jammed up. So in the past, MBC advocated for funding increases in new institutions to help us solve those problems. That resulted in a very successful bond campaign in 2020 that was passed by the Maine people well over 60%, and new institutions to take in that money and distribute it so that we can solve these problems. That resulted in the creation of the Maine Connectivity Authority. We'll hear more about that next. And we are supporting them to build the absorptive capacity to be successful in those areas. The other thing that we're seeing sort of outside of the state sector is a lot of private capital investment in building fiber optic, that state-of-the-art, best-in-class technology to improve internet service all over the state. But they're focusing, as is logical, in places that are going to pay off in the short term. So they're focusing on compact urban areas. They're focusing on some of the wealthier suburbs of Portland and some of our larger coastal towns. That's great. That is good for those folks that will get access to that technology, potentially in the short term get access to a competitive choice for another broadband option. But when the private sector does that, and they do it only in places where it is profitable, you end up with these donut holes. And I think those were referenced at the start. We can talk about that a little bit later, but longer roads at the edge of towns with fewer potential subscribers don't get that private investment, and those people don't end up connected. And then over the long term, we face a risk of having repeating the situation where we have places with one provider of internet on a private basis, and that we don't end up with competition. We don't end up with the market forces pushing our infrastructure to get better and better over time. So if you have questions about the basics of broadband technology, how expansion works, where to get started, if you have constituents who want to know more about how to get started, get involved in this area, we can either answer those questions or we can find the right partner in their geographic area that can answer those questions. We also have a lot of resources to help them get started and find their way. Also, if members of the legislature or of the public have suggested policy improvements that they'd like to make, we can help facilitate those as well, and we'd like to hear about those. Please sign up for our mailing list. We also have a public events calendar on our website where you can see all the events that are going on in the state. I'm going to leave it there, very brief. I hope that was helpful, and I hope that kind of gives you a better understanding of where we fit in the sector. And I think I want to hand it over to MCA to give their perspective as well.
Thanks, Miles. We appreciate that. Thank you everybody here for having us. I think Tanya and I are going to tag team this, and Kendra Jo is here and probably the most knowledgeable out of all of us for having a lot of these community-based conversations. So we're going to try to share information as compactly as possible. A lot of it's pretty dense and there's a lot to go through, and so we're going to try to touch on the high points. And I know we'll have future opportunities to dig into specific topics a little bit. So again, thank you for having us here. Maine Connectivity Authority was formed in last year, 2021, as a quasi-governmental entity, and we are the primary broadband agency for the state of Maine. Do want to be very clear, we are standing on the shoulders of folks like Peggy and Stephanie, who were at Connect Maine before us, the folks at Maine Broadband Coalition, and certainly this caucus. I was talking with Andrew Butcher earlier today, who I mentioned is our president, is not able to be with us. And he said, be sure to mention that everything that we're doing is a result of the vision that the caucus helped put forward when they create MCA. And I just want to kind of circle back there and make sure that that we kind of appreciate that moment, that there was a vision, and that this vision is come to reality, and now we're actually doing that work. So thank you all for that support, and in particular, Senator Bennett. I know you were one of the co-chairs last time too. MCA has 3 top-line goals: effective, accessible connectivity, be universally available to the entire state, that secure, affordable, reliable, competitive, sustainable, and forward-looking infrastructure, all of the adjectives there, is in place to meet all of our future needs. And this is a really important one, that all residents, business, and institutions be able to take full advantage of the economic, health, educational, and other opportunities available through connectivity. This isn't just about dropping fiber at every home and business across the state. It is about equipping the people of the state of Maine with the tools and the skills to take full advantage of that connectivity. I wanted to take one quick moment as I mentioned, Andrew's in Washington, and Tanya shared this anecdote today, and I hope I get it right, Tanya, so call me out if I don't. Andrew's at the State Broadband Leaders Network, and so meeting with broadband leaders from across the country, and was speaking on a panel with folks from the state of New York today. And we have one of the programs we're about to talk about really quickly is the Regional and Tribal Broadband Partners Program, which I wish Maggie were here. It's her brainchild, and she's at home with sick kids. And we envisioned and stood this program up in a matter of months, and it's something we're really proud of. And the state of New York on the panel today said, yeah, we've been looking at that, and we think we might try to do something like that in the state of New York too. And I wanted to share that because not from a place of hubris, but a place of pride, and also to really clarify that the responsibility that we all feel to serve the state of Maine. and to not only connect Mainers and provide them with skills and tools they need, but to really lead the country and be a leading broadband agency for the entire country. And I think we're striving to do that, and we're meeting that in a lot of ways. So everybody here should be really proud of the work that MCA and MBC and everybody involved is doing. Just want to finish quick intro with we are here. Our doors, emails, phones, Slack channels are open. We really do want to hear from you all, from your constituents. We're going to talk a little bit at the end of this about kind of some specific areas where we can engage and provide that support. But if you have questions, just let us know. We really do appreciate sharing information. So I'm going to share a screen quickly here. Stack. All right, and everybody see a map?
Yes.
Good news. So one of the first things that we at MCA are trying to do is identify the problem, right? Understand where the problem and where the solutions are. We have a public viewer on the homepage of our website. Definitely encourage you all to check that out. It is a great tool for you all and your constituents to understand. This first tab shows the concentration. You can see the legend here in the top right corner of the unserved miles, showed the chart of the breakdown of unserved, underserved, and served areas. This is another way to look at that, to try to get a sense of how those blend together for the state. It also allows you to drill down a little bit, and you can get a comparison of the statewide averages versus what you're looking at. So as you zoom into that map, if you're looking at a district or at a community, you can get a sense of how that compares. So again, a nice tool. And we've actually been talking about overlaying districts onto this map and providing that as a tool for you all to use, specifically both for you all or your constituents to pull that data. The funding awards tab allows you to see where MCA and Connect Maine funded programs have been issued. I'm gonna click, see if, oops, sorry about that. Give me 1 second here. Just going to quickly click over here so you can see the funding awards. Can everybody still see my screen okay? So you can, you can zoom in and see some of the awards, so you can learn a little bit more about them, the amount of money, the number of connections they provided. This map is being updated continuously as we roll out more programs and awards. So identifying the problem and then looking for the solutions. One last tab I do want to call out really quickly, the Internet Service Providers tab. If folks are looking to try to understand what service is available at their location, so again, a great constituent tool, that Internet Service Provider tab allows them to search by address, look down a list of providers. It's also the same platform that allows us to conduct the FCC challenges. Again, a helpful tool there. Quick overview of the funding that we're looking at, and these are this is state and federal funding. These are the big slugs of money you've been hearing are coming to the state. The ARPA Capital Projects Funds money is starting to flow, and we have programs built on that right now. I'm going to show you those in a second. Some of those are also funded with the Maine Jobs and Recovery Program funding. These two together, $150 million, we call that our all-in programming. And there's a handful of programs that fall underneath that. The next one that Tanya is going to talk about in a minute here is from the IIJA, which is our BEAD and digital equity funding. Separate program, separate rules, and a little bit more of a structure there, and I'll let Tanya get to that. This third one over here, we have a $53 million proposal into NTIA, which is the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, the folks at the federal government who have a lot of this money. And that's for a middle mile program for the state. And I think Miles, correct me if I'm wrong, but we might touch on middle mile in a future meeting and go a little bit deeper. Know that is out there. That would mean a $35 million grant and some of those other partnership funds. We're hoping to hear about that this month or early next month. that would be revolutionary for the state's middle mile infrastructure, and would be a game changer for the state. So that one is kind of, and that's a competitive grant. There's only a certain amount of money for the whole country. So we will keep everybody posted on that. Quickly, this is a quick snapshot of our current funding programs. If some of you have been following along, our Connect Ready grants were approved on January 20th at the board meeting. 12 projects, 31 communities, 16,000 connections. And this, I know it's buried down at the bottom here, but 17 million in private funding leveraged, something that we're really proud of and excited about and hope to replicate on other programs in the future. You know, those are ISPs and communities leveraging their ARPA funding, using some of the ISP's funding to contribute to those. So Kendra Joe's Get Ready Community Support Program. I feel like I'm not going to do this justice, Kendra Joe, in about 10 seconds and quick bullets. There are 12 projects, 20 communities represented. And Kendra Joe can really speak to that more in depth if you have questions there. Our regional and tribal broadband partners, Nancy, I saw you on. Hi. Nancy is Grossmart, Maine is our regional and tribal broadband partner for Kennebec County. 13 partners. This is really a capacity building effort. 15 new FTEs will be added across the state for these regional partners focused on broadband. These are folks whose job it is at these regional partnership level to focus just on broadband. So really great work to be done there. And those partners are going to help us as we start talking about the BEAD and the BAP planning that Tanya's going to touch on. They are really going to be the ones who are helping us on the ground there. Our Reach Me line extensions, that's working with ISPs to provide line extensions. These are, when we talk about these donut holes, we talk about these corners of communities where it hasn't made financial sense for the ISP to build out up to this point. We're trying to work with them to incentivize them to pay for a portion of that build so that they can provide universal coverage and reach those least served locations. So we received 12 proposed projects. It's a $20 million funding bucket. We received requests for $62 million. So we are in the process. Certainly there is demand there. We are in the process of going through negotiation and meetings with those ISPs to look at those projects and identify which of those areas are most in need for that funding. And then one last one is our Jumpstart wireless trial projects. A little bit less visibility on this, but understanding that it's going to take all approaches. Everything is on the table here. There is not a single one size fits all approach that we can take, especially in a state like Maine. And so we have 4 projects. They are under construction. It's hitting 9 communities, and it's another 14,000 people who will have connection. Those are trialing a few different kinds of 5G and CBRS wireless technologies across the state. So we're looking forward to trying to learn from this, understand how fixed wireless can play a role within this toolkit of types of connectivity that we're rolling out. And Tanya, I'm going to stop talking. It's up to you.
All right. Thanks, Brian. So my part of this is to really review with the caucus, and I'm doing this with a number of groups across the state as we start rolling this process out, what we call the Broadband Action Plan. So there are 2 main buckets of federal funding that MCA is involved with right now, in addition to the CPF and the MJRP funding that we are already in the process of deploying. First is BEAD planning funds. That is sort of the big bucket of money. We submitted a planning application in 2022 and received a $5 million planning award in November of 2022. And that means that we have about 270 days from the receipt of that $5 million planning grant to create and submit a 5-year statewide broadband plan so that we can access the full allocation of BEAD funding. The BEAD funding is on a scale that we just simply have not seen before for broadband infrastructure deployment. Our BEAD allocation is expected to be somewhere in the neighborhood of about $235 million. Digital equity is the other main component of the federal funding that's available through the broadband, through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And digital equity is a smaller total pot of money, but a very, very important one. It does not make sense for your constituents, for all of Maine, to have access to the internet if they don't know how to use it well, how to use devices, have devices to access it, and understand how to use that technology to participate in the economy and society today and of the future. So that digital equity planning money was received also in November of 2022, and that was about $500,000. And that also means that we have a digital equity plan that we are preparing to submit. And instead of doing two parallel planning processes that are both related to broadband, and in the eyes of probably everybody outside of the MCA would seem like they're generally the same thing, MCA decided to combine that planning process and approach, and instead of creating two separate plans, create one broadband action plan that really has digital equity at its core. That it is critically important that we get unconnected communities connected, and in particular that we pay attention to communities that have been disenfranchised and typically underrepresented in participation in the digital economy and digital society. And those are called covered populations in the Digital Equity Act. Huge pockets of Maine, huge numbers of people in the state of Maine qualify as covered populations such as older Mainers, veterans, folks with disabilities. You all know that your constituencies have huge numbers of those covered populations. So very important work that we have to do with digital equity. So that creates the broadband action plan. Next slide, Brian. Sorry, you ended up with a clicker here, so thanks. So we want to make sure that everyone has a sense of the timeline for BEAD. Because the BEAD money is very substantial, there is a tendency to say, oh, great, well, let's get that money here and it'll solve the problem and it'll all be solved really quickly, right? These projects are incredibly large and complicated. And before we can spend $1 of BEAD funding, we have to create that 5-year action plan. And then we have to turn that into an initial proposal and then a final proposal. In 20 years of doing federal grant work in economic and community development, I have never seen a process like this before. So we essentially have 3 iterations of our proposal to complete by the end of 2024. So it is not likely that we will see $1 of BEAD funding to be spent until well into 2024. And that's why it's so important that MCA has the opportunity now to deploy those previously allocated funds, because we have the ability to start making projects happen now and build a plan that really helps to fill the gaps, those infamous donut holes that we've talked about, to use this BEAD funding and the digital equity implementation funding as efficiently as effectively as possible. Once we access that funding, we have 4 full years from that final proposal and allocation date to implement the funding. So it's sort of referred to as a 5-year timeline, but we do have so much substantial planning work to be done that really the bulk of it will happen in 4 years. Next slide, Brian. So what does that mean for Maine, and what does that mean for you as the Broadband Caucus and for our communities in terms of the broadband action plan that Maine is required to develop? This is really what it's going to look like in the next few months. February, March, and April are what we call the engagement period, where we are working with our regional partners. We are working with a wonderful group of organizations that cover every part of the state, and also tribal broadband partners to hold community meetings, surveys, focus groups. MBC is a part of that as well, helping to really provide technical assistance and support with those groups and that new capacity so that we can do the absolute best job of meeting people where they are. You cannot create a broadband plan by just doing an online survey, because the people that are most affected are not going to be able to answer your questions. So we really have to go to direct mail, getting into libraries, being in community meeting spaces, and talking with those local partners on the ground about how to engage local communities to find out what their needs are, what the challenges are, and what are the opportunities in those parts of the state. We will also be working to complete a regional digital equity plan in each of those regions. Those regional broadband partners will do that work, and then those will be compiled into the statewide digital equity plan. That is, honestly, it's just one of the major chapters of the broadband action plan that will be submitted. We're also going to have a significant amount of time for stakeholder engagement, including our board, keeping them apprised and keeping the plan in line with strategic priorities and reflecting what they see in the community, but also lots of opportunity for engagement with groups like this, where in particular, the policy environment is a very important part of that broadband action plan. We need to understand the challenges and the opportunities when it comes to the policy landscape, primarily at a state level, but also noting federal policy challenges that need to be addressed in order to really deploy this broadband infrastructure funding in the best way that we can. In May, we'll complete a draft of the plan and we will have an extensive review process. And in June, we'll put it out for public comment. And then in July, we'll revise, we'll synthesize all the public comments, and we'll prepare to submit the plan at the end of July, the 1st of August. So that's our very near-term timeline, and it feels nearer every single day. Anticipated deliverables from the Broadband Action Plan. First is really creating a roadmap for how we're going to deploy these funds and align them both with the needs of communities in terms of broadband service and availability and affordability, with digital equity priorities, such as, we have workforce needs in order to deploy this funding, in order to be able to maintain this infrastructure that we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on. We also have significant opportunities when it comes to how Maine's economy can grow. Particularly our traditional industries can be very well served by having greater implementation and accessibility to broadband. We need to keep an eye on a number of priorities at the same time, and then think about how we put those all together into one plan. And that plan then becomes the roadmap for those investments. The BEAD funding, the notice of funding opportunity, requires that we prioritize connecting those communities that are not yet at a level of 25/3. So that means that those communities, when you look at those maps and you're looking at your districts, thinking about those communities that are not yet at 25/3, and the projects that answer those challenges may not follow town lines, they may not follow county lines, they may be combinations of communities, and putting those donut holes together until we make an entire donut so that it makes sense to mobilize the team to build the infrastructure for that, to create that solution. We also want to create an updated decision-making process for investments. When we have two communities that are both very needy in terms of digital, in terms of broadband service, what are the digital equity factors? Does one of those communities have a higher concentration of covered populations and people that have not benefited from being connected to the digital economy and society? Those are some additional factors that will layer into our investment strategy that will be built by this broadband action plan. And one more time with the policy issues, we also want to create in this broadband action plan policy recommendations so that we can facilitate connectivity. I think Maine has been so fortunate in having legislators that have been so committed to understanding broadband, having a caucus, really getting into the weeds to figure out how to best support your communities and your constituents when it comes to broadband. And we know that we can have a great dialogue with all of you and help share what we learned through the broadband action planning process in terms of policy recommendations to facilitate complete connectivity. We're also going to create a really large menu of projects and partnerships that are going to compete for this funding. And really, honestly, the hardest part is going to be prioritizing. And I want to say we have an incredible wealth of data. The team at MCA believes in data as the sort of central theme to creating our decisions and our strategic plans. We have an incredible data team, and we're also working with some great research partners to supplement that. As you see by some of the resources we have on our website, we're going to have a ton of data to share with you. We have a lot now. We're going to continue to have a lot more. And that can be very compelling for how you talk to your communities and your stakeholders about digital infrastructure investments. One more, maybe, Brian? Yes, back to you.
Hey, thank you, Tanya. So no, I think you forgot the last part of the BAP timeline, which is taking the month of August off, right?
Several versions of this slide deck actually have lawn chairs at the end where we're all just taking like a very much needed break after what is essentially a year-long sprint to get this process done.
I did want to just call out that we are continuing to develop resources specifically with your constituents in mind and folks around the state, working with our interagency broadband manager, Kira, putting together resources like this. There's a frequently asked questions that we see coming over the transom, and trying to help route those in the most helpful way. MCA is the best contact in some cases for some of those questions, and in some cases we're not. It might be the OPA or it might be the PUC, and so really want to help you all understand how to route any of those inquiries. And so as we put these together, we'll certainly be sharing through this caucus and widely on the website as well. But and if we certainly encourage you, as you receive questions and inquiries or concerns, please do send them our way. It's helpful as we continue to develop these resources to know what kind of information and how we can present it in the most helpful way to folks out there. And then Tanya, I'm going to let you take this last slide, if that's all right, since a couple of these are kind of BAP-ish calls to action.
Yep. So just a couple of takeaways for folks. I know this is a lot of information to process and digest in a short amount of time, but ways that you can help understand the process and the timeline. When you get questions from constituents about, geez, I heard there's all this federal money that's going to solve our problems this year, right? Just having a general sense of the timeline and what the process is going to be, that we do have to create some planning documents, and that it's really important that we engage as communities in the planning process so that our challenges and our opportunities are reflected in that plan. We're going to have a ton of engagement opportunities, and we would love your help in publicizing those to your constituents and to the public at large. You all have a great platform to work from, and so it would be very helpful for us to have your assistance in publicizing those events, whether they're online, in-person, community meetings, focus group surveys, whatever they are. That would be much appreciated. We also want to invite and encourage you to participate in the planning process as well. As legislators, as leaders in your communities, we want the best plan possible for Maine that really reflects all the challenges and opportunities and those local priorities that that regions have for how we might solve their problems. The better and the richer the process is to create the plan, the better the outcomes are going to be. And finally, just as always, I think Miles referenced this at the beginning. I know Brian said it as well. The Maine Broadband Coalition and the Maine Connectivity Authority are here to be a resource for all of you. We have an incredible amount of wonderful staff people that have so much knowledge in different areas, and we are learning every day. And the best practices that are being shared among the networks of broadband agencies across the states are really phenomenal, and we're very grateful to be part of that community. So anytime you have a need for information, you want to understand the process, you have anything that you think we can assist with, please feel free to reach out to us. That's it.
Great. Thank you all so much for the very thorough overview. I feel like I've been trying to keep up with what you all are doing, but I certainly learned a lot this evening, and I'm sure my colleagues did as well. If you could stop the screen sharing.
Oh, sorry about that.
Great, thank you. Okay. So I guess we just see, we don't have that much time left, but that's okay. We have more caucuses coming. I want to see if anyone has any questions for our presenters based on what we've heard this evening, and feel free to raise your virtual hand or your real hand. I have one question. I'll start, which is, looking at the timeline for the BEAD funding, for instance, which looks like the most significant amount of money hopefully headed our way, and also the governor's, I don't know what to call it, goal of having people connected by the end of 2024. How do these things reconcile with each other? Or can we do it?
It's going to be a challenge, right? And it's going to take all options. It's going to take private investment from ISPs and communities and organizations. It's going to take MCA being really efficient with our distribution of those funds. I am hopeful there are remaining ARPA capital projects funds money. So there will be another cohort of Connector Ready. So one of the reasons we are staggering this and trying to phase the deployment of the money trying to get it out the door as quickly as possible, but also recognizing, I think, as Tanya mentioned, that there's no real big gaps, right? That there's not a year where we're not seeing funding go out the door. So that goal is certainly one we're working towards and is top of mind. And I would be shocked if I said anybody at MCA doesn't wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it in the best way. But it's going to be a challenge for sure. And it is certainly something, you know, I think the one thing we are really conscious of is there is certainly the governor's goal for the end of that. That's not the end of, and we're struggling for a better analogy, right? Like that's the battle, there's a bigger war. And I don't like using the violent analogy, but I think we also want to just recognize that end of 2024, even if all those folks have that connectivity, that's not the end, and there's still a lot more work to be done.
I just want to also note that one of the stakeholder groups that we are engaging in our process is a capital markets task force. We're bringing together about 30 leaders from financial institutions, philanthropic leaders, people who really have incredible experience in the sort of what is the capital stack that could be available to leverage the unprecedented amount of federal funding that's coming to Maine. But that money alone is probably not enough to do all the jobs that we need to do to really create a Maine that has the connectivity that's needed for everyone to have what they need. So we are bringing those folks together. The first meeting is on Friday. I'm really excited about that because I think that gives us the opportunity to think we have to leverage these funds. We also need to look at, do we have all the right tools in the toolbox when it comes to financing these projects? And how do we get everybody thinking about that common vision and bringing all of their financial resources to the table? So that's another piece of that infrastructure, is that capital infrastructure as well.
And just noting that Representative Ziegler is on here, and I think you're working on some legislation along those lines as well.
Senator Bennett, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I just want to say, first of all, great presentation. I'm so happy about MCA's progress in a rush so far. It's been amazing, and I appreciate the shout out, Brian. You know, the authorizing legislation that created the MCA was my bill, but co-sponsored by the other chairs of the Broadband Caucus. And I think it still stands as the only piece of legislation that the governor herself has personally testified on in favor of before the legislature. And I think that says a lot about the kind of unanimous support that this initiative has, a completely nonpartisan, not well past bipartisan support. I just love that about this whole initiative, and we got to keep it on that track. One of the particular things, and I'm really grateful for your leadership, to go from Senator Grochowski's great question here, I do worry about this deadline the governor said, and you know, I know the work continues. I think there's some avenues that I hope we don't get rushed down into because of, you know, the urgency of deployment. And one area in particular I'm interested to get your perspective on is, you know, and this goes to the question of digital equity. I guess maybe digital inclusion is also this kind of the same thing, but part of that you didn't mention is cost. And cost for Mainers. There's a lot of Mainers out there that not only don't have the technical capabilities, but they don't have the budget. And a lot of other jurisdictions like Sweden and elsewhere, you know, they get high speed broadband at much less expense than what most Mainers or other people in this country are paying for, and largely because we have a system which is created out of a private interest rather than a public interest, and as you touched on, monopolistic advantages. So one solution to all that are broadband utility districts where dark fiber networks are owned and operated, not operated necessarily, but owned by the people or communities or municipalities or groups of municipalities. This has been successful, highly successful in Vermont and other places. And I just wondered if you could speak to the question of broadband utility districts, how you see them fitting into this mix, how you see them positively affecting cost pressures and all of that, and particularly since looping back to all these issues are connected to the question of the timeline for doing this. Those entities themselves sometimes take a little bit longer to put together because they involve interlocal agreements, et cetera. So there's a lot there, but if you could just address it, I would be grateful. Thank you.
I'm going to touch on a few of those things, and Tanya and Kendra Joe certainly welcome thoughts too. First, thank you, Senator Bennett. I think the first thing you touched on was affordability, and that is a key program principle that we integrate into everything we do across the board. I totally forgot to tease that we have a campaign launching in March to promote the Affordable Connectivity Program. So that's a program where folks can receive up to $30 off their bill. We're working with Education Superhighway, who's a national partner, to roll out a Maine branded campaign with those regional tribal broadband partners across the state to ensure that everybody who's eligible for that program is taking advantage. Currently, we're at, I think, 29% participation. And so we do want to, we are also baking affordability into a lot of our programs. The requirements for being funded under Connect to Ready required that you offered an ACP. Basically, to anybody who qualified for ACP, we built in for any applicant that they had to have a standard offering that would essentially make that free for those ACP folks, so that it would be a offering that would essentially come down to zero. So certainly something we are aware of, in the same way that if we folks don't have the tools and the skills to use it, if they can't afford it, we could drop fiber at every location in the state. It doesn't do us anything if they can't afford it. So, I think on the question of broadband utility districts, or BUDs, as they're commonly referred to, we certainly want to do everything we can to support those types of entities in the state. I think understanding that type of competitive model is great when we look at that dark fiber, and understanding also that regionalization, and I might let Kendra Jo speak to kind of that element of a little bit, is a really powerful way for a lot of these smaller communities where there might be those pockets of unserved to come together and put together an entity. I think one of the things we recognize is the challenges around financing broadband utility districts. There's not real clear avenues to necessarily provide, when they go for the bonding and kind of securing that type of funding. It can be hard for them because they don't have a proven track record. And if they're going for a revenue bond, there's no revenue to show, right? They're a brand new entity that's about to stand this up. So I think that is certainly, when Tanya mentioned the capital task force, those are the types of solutions we're looking to truly really identify there, so that there are no limits to kind of how those BUDs could take part. Tanya, Kendra Jo, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Brian, you hit on a lot of it, the regional aspect of a broadband utility, as well as the additional kind of benefits of that publicly owned model, of the ability to set price or start to control a little bit of those affordability pieces. And for communities that are putting up funding, they see a value in that return on revenue kind of project model, the ability to have a seat at the table in a real way, and hold internet service providers, and in some cases it's one, in some cases it's hopefully more than one, but hold them to servicing the community, and doing what the community needs, not just now, bringing the service that the community needs now, but also 10 years from now, 20 years from now, as we continue to just increase our need for reliable high-speed internet access and change as users. We have definitely changed in the last 3 years. We've even changed in the last 6 to 12 months, right, as users across the state. And that's going to continue to happen. And I think it's a realization that for some communities, they really prioritize and see the value in that investment. And then it's just coming down to, making those models work. And I think in the places that we see utility districts stand up, or communities really lean towards developing a utility district or have those conversations, they see the value in community engagement, that there's a real return on investment when you bring your community along from the beginning, when they see themselves in the product, in the value statements. And it's something, we definitely see in places like the Waldo Broadband Corporation and Down East Broadband Utility and others, the incredible amount of community participation and just knowledge and time spent at the local level, so that it's not just about the person who, they're sitting in front of their computer saying, I have enough. they recognize that someone else in their community doesn't have enough. And maybe 10 years from now, someone sitting in their home, it wouldn't be enough. And that kind of conversation, taking it away from the individual and putting it more towards a community-wide, prosperity and resilience conversation is where I feel like utilities really thrive. And if we can work together and learn from those utilities that have already stood up and those that'll come down the pike as well around, the efficiencies, how we can make it more efficient, move a little bit quicker, but also the funding needed to really get them going to prove that concept, because it has been proven elsewhere. It's been proven here as well. But we can definitely replicate and scale up that kind of model. I'm going to hand it to Miles because I know we're bumping up time.
Yeah, I'll just be very quick. I appreciate everything that you said, Senator Bennett, and agree that there's a structural problem here that's hard to solve piece by piece. We have a big state with lots of small municipalities. We don't have a structure that supports them at the county level like some other places. So it's hard to ask towns with a small number of people to do this all themselves. Do they have committed volunteers with spare time on their hands, with technical expertise, who are going to organize all this stuff? When we in Maine and in the United States build a new road, the Department of Transportation, with a huge amount of infrastructure and technical expertise and knowledge, supports that town to get that project done. And we don't quite yet think of broadband at the same level. And I think that there are a lot of structural solutions that would need to take place, which I'd be interested in exploring through this caucus. So.
Thank you all. I think maybe a good note to end on. I know we have so much more to talk about, but in good news, we get to meet in 2 weeks' time. I think it's 2 weeks, right? Great. At that time, I'm really hopeful that we can have legislators share some of the bills that they're thinking about or hearing about. We're not going to take any time to do that right now in the interest of everyone resuming their evenings. But I just want to thank everybody for presenting. That was a phenomenal amount of information. And I have received some messages from colleagues who are sad not to join, but are looking forward to watching the recording. So it's a good time commitment. I hope that can be multiplied outward for folks who couldn't be here tonight. And I think also you shared some great resources that we'll be able to send out to the entirety of the legislature as a follow-up to this meeting as well, especially that document that was like, here's all the information that you need to know about who to contact with these kind of questions. I'd see something like that. And I'm like, yes, all of that in one place. That's phenomenal. So again, thank you everyone for joining. And for those legislators who joined us a little late, we're thrilled that you came, and we look forward to seeing you and hearing more from you and all of our colleagues in 2 weeks. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you all
Thanks
for the
all.
opportunity.
Have a good
evening.
night.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Good night.